happened to me 4 years ago. At the time, I was 17 years old and had been offered a job at a classmate's mom's mini market. Here in my country, I'm in South America for context. Those are pretty common and sell everything from frozen food to bathroom necessities. Usually, people will build a tiny separate building next to their house for it and work the store themselves. Every condo and village, these seem to mean something entirely different here, has about one on every main street. Anyway, my classmate's mom offered me to work there, Monday to Saturday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., with some very good cash and free lunch. He lived about a mile away, and my house was directly connected to his by a cycle path, so I would get to use my brand new bike as means of transportation. Basically, the perfect job for a teenager. I did not enjoy working there. Don't get me wrong, I actually like working, and I like money, but this store had so much going on in it. So I had to make ice cream cones, bag chicken breasts, laminate ham and cheese. Again, I think those things already come laminated in most countries. Work the coffee machine, and keep everything immaculate and in order, while checking that all the stuff this lady had in her store wasn't expired. Keep in mind, I'm talking January 2014, and I found a bag of sausages expired on January 2013 being sold during my first week there. Overall, it wasn't really abusive. She just didn't know how to manage her store or her money. That's a completely different story, though. But by the way, ex-boss, let's not ever meet again, because God, your store was unsanitary AF. Anyhow, one of my main jobs there was keeping an eye on fruit and veggies, meaning checking for the rotten ones and throwing them away, and refilling the goddamn tomatoes if the shelf was emptying. There was only one huge problem for me as a 5'4", 120-pound girl, the 45-pound potato sack. For context, right in front of the store, there was a huge green area, and we have public workers, gardeners, who take care of them. They have one specific person in charge of specific areas, so the same man would always be there doing his job. Let's call him Pete. Back when my only boss and her family worked their store, they would ask Pete to help take the potatoes from the car and drop them at the back of the store. He would always help, and the only thing he asked for as payment was a cup of coffee and a sandwich. This man was in his late 50s, didn't go through education, he couldn't read, and usually asked me to read the newspaper to him. And even though he didn't seem to have any kind of mental handicap, he wouldn't understand that there were limits to how you approach people and what is and isn't appropriate. More on that later. Anyway, whenever we had to take the potatoes out of the car, my boss would phone him and he would come in quickly, as he had a red bike with an engine attached to it. Everyone was very comfortable with him. He was just an old man who helped with the heavier duties and asked for very little in return. As I started learning the job, my boss wouldn't be around to help me when I had doubts, meaning I was completely alone in the store. I would struggle by myself on moving the potatoes from the back of the store, and often would lose a piece of a fingernail or something. Because of this, whenever she left, she would ask the gardener to keep an eye on me and help me with it. The problem began pretty quickly. I've interacted many times with people with conditions, and I'm not trying to be rude, but when someone has kind of a mental health issue or syndrome, even if they can normally function and even have jobs, you can kind of tell, and I assure you, this man was completely healthy and normal. Looking back, I think he was using his lack of education as a way to shield his behavior, and so people pitied him and felt guilty for not liking him, and he would try to take advantage of the girls who worked there. There had been some before me. I never met them. He would fixate on certain topics, always repeat the same conversations, and become way too close to me and my coworker, another classmate. He would stand too close and talk some very personal problems with me. Keep in mind, he was 30 plus years older. I was underage. He became another one of the many unpleasant duties I had to deal with on a daily basis. As weeks progressed, he gave me his phone number so that I could call him whenever I needed assistance. I never called him because, of course, I didn't want to be around him, and because I'm the type of person who thinks they don't need help. When he realized I wasn't calling him, he tried to push me into giving him my number. I never did, so he would stay right in front of the store and come in every 20 minutes. He gave me a bicycle seat, and even though I told him I didn't want it, he could keep it, thanks a lot. He removed my original brown seat and put on the one he got me. He would tell me he was single and owned a house. He would call me pretty and try to play with my hair, etc. I was severely uncomfortable around him, but no one seemed to be bothered by any of those things. It made me feel very awkward and guilty for feeling these things, which only contributed to the already disappointing feeling of working in this unsanitary place. I decided to just do my best to ignore him. When he realized I was distant, he started accusing me of being mean with my boss, but nothing else. It was only a summer job, so I thought I would just have to stand it for a month, then it would be over. But oh no. One good day, 2 weeks before I had to leave, he tells me he's in love with me. Dead serious, too. I was 17 and had no experience with love and such. I'd never had anyone tell me something like that. Usually, I'm a very short-tempered person and snap easily and could have told him to stop fucking with me. But this just left me speechless. He had already been flirting with me for 2 months, even though I was underage. He had given me presents. I had seen him lift 2 potato sacks on one shoulder. He could certainly do as he pleased with me. I started to sweat. I was feeling violated, even when he wasn't trying to approach me. But he just stared so deeply into my eyes that it was clear he was trying to make me feel inferior. I didn't know what to do, and he wasn't leaving the store. My boss arrived like 10 minutes after this, so we started chatting with her, but I was left feeling violated for the rest of my shift. 2 weeks after, my contract ended for the summer. I thought I would never see him again, but again, oh no. There are green areas where I live too. One day, as I was walking my dog, I see a bright red bike with an engine attached to it, next to some swings in the park. I recognize it. It was his bike. He saw me and ran towards me, crossing the street, even though cars were coming. I have 3 dogs. One is a pit bull mix, and the other a husky mix. The third one is a Yorkie, before you ask, and none of them liked him. You would think my big-ass dogs would stop him from standing too close to me, but no, and he only took a few steps back when my pit tried to bite his hand. I never had seen them so angry. He told me his boss had realized he was slacking on his job to help at the store, and he didn't like that, so he was moved to another area away from the store. My area. He insisted on asking where my house was, just like he insisted on my phone number back in the day. My house was 1/4 of a mile away. I told him I lived in the opposite direction because, of course, I didn't want to tell him where I lived. That day, I told my mom about this creepy old man and all the things he had done to that point. She yelled at me for not snapping at him or something, like she didn't understand that this man could carry 2 of those potato sacks on one shoulder. I asked her not to tell my dad because he would get mad at me. Yes, they're the kind of parents who get mad at their kids for things that aren't their fault. They once yelled at my brother when he had his phone stolen on the bus by a guy with a knife. Mom did tell, though. The next day, my father mysteriously offered to walk the dogs, and the day after that, Pete wasn't around to be seen. Mom told me later that Dad approached Pete and threatened him. Knowing my dad, he probably told him about his military background and his gun. Pete asked to be moved to any other area right there, with his boss on speaker and my dad listening. My city is pretty small, So I still see him when I go on longer walks, about 4 miles from my house, but he no longer tries to talk to me. Instead, he keeps his head down and starts moving faster in the opposite direction. Goodbye, you old creep. Let's not fucking meet. Again. It was a hot, humid summer day, and my aunt was having a small get-together at her house. My family went over in the afternoon. After a few hours, there was a lull in action, and my cousin and I wanted to go for a walk and enjoy the air as it was getting a bit cooler. We had no particular route in mind when we set off, but after about a mile, my cousin suggested we continue to our other aunt's apartment, which was the neighborhood over, and check in on her. The idea didn't sit well with me. I was, and still am, a very cautious person, but she was older than me and assured me it would be fine. We wanted to keep walking anyway, so why not? We walked for so long that the sun began setting as we crossed over a bridge that traversed a creek and brought us into the more urban neighborhood in which my aunt lived. We stopped to take a short break, admiring the water while we chatted. I remember seeing the orange and red deepen in the sky, and the shadows of the trees along the bank lengthen and gently sway. At this point, I was getting a bit tired, so I was happy when my cousin said we only had a few more blocks to go. We kept on a sidewalk that ran the length of the right side of a very wide road. As we kept going, we noticed on the left side of the road there was a smaller one that branched off at about a 30-degree angle. Given the fading light, we could also make out the figure of a large-framed person walking in our direction. He was about 1,000 feet away when he saw us and roared at the top of his lungs.
Hey!
He flailed his arms to get our attention. Then he pointed and hollered.
You!
My cousin and I were taken aback. I remember thinking why he would scream like that, even if he thought he knew us. The manner and tone of his yell was unsettling. It was about 5 seconds before our mix of surprise and concern quickly turned to pure fear as the man took off in an all-out sprint towards us. Now, 1,000 feet seemed decently far away, but he was coming at us like Usain Bolt, and he was closing this distance fast. Fortunately, my cousin snapped into flight mode, and we took off running as fast as we've ever ran in our lives. With all the adrenaline pumping through me, I barely felt my feet hit the ground, each spring forward. Even so, I was just barely keeping up with my cousin, so she grabbed my wrist and held it firmly as we ran. The guy shouted once again as he chased us, and my cousin glanced back. I'll never forget the look of terror on her face. She must have had an extra rush of adrenaline, because she burst forward even faster, my wrist in hand. We were flying. As we closed in on my aunt's place, I could hear the man's footsteps getting a little louder. I could tell from the sound that he wasn't directly behind us, but I prayed we'd manage to keep enough distance to turn right at the next block and get to my aunt's yard unscathed. Thankfully, the sun was almost fully set, and it was even darker than before, so I knew it would be harder to see where we went once we turned off the main road. Within a few seconds, we were rounding the corner and slowing down to open my aunt's gate. She lived in a basement apartment on a corner lot, which had a yard that was fenced all around by 6-foot-tall wooden panels. As my cousin went through the gate and ran into the yard first, I was the one to close it. We'd been going so fast, and I had so much adrenaline. My first impulse was to slam it and run down the steps to the apartment door. But my instinct told me that the noise might alert him to where we were, so I closed the gate as quietly and quickly as possible. I looked for a lock, but there was none. I ran to where my cousin was, on the steps leading down to the door. We stood on the steps with our eyes just above ground level, trying to keep as quiet as possible. A few seconds later, I heard the man's footsteps and saw him run across the street that flanked my aunt's yard. He stopped for a moment to look around, breathing hard and mumbling expletives. I held my breath as I saw his eyes and the top of his head swivel around wildly, searching for any sign of us. In a flash, he suddenly took off down the side street, past the yard, and I breathed a sigh of relief. We knew we had to get indoors now. We had waited to knock on my aunt's door before because we didn't want to make any noise. We knocked on the door, being careful not to bang and draw attention, but there was no answer. No one was home. My cousin began looking for a spare key that she may have hidden, while I tried to get the small window by the door open. No luck. At this point, we were trying not to panic, but it started to dawn on us the danger we were in, and the fact that we didn't have any good options for safely getting inside or back home. It was dark now. We were both tired and knew we couldn't outrun him again if he doubled back and saw us. We didn't want to be sitting ducks, especially since the gate didn't have a lock, and trying to run back was too risky given how far it was. Fortunately, my prayers were answered some minutes later when the neighbor's backyard light turned on and we heard barking. A couple was letting their small dogs out, and they stood on their deck talking while the dogs ran around. My cousin and I crept over to the fence and could see through a few cracks in between the panels. We managed to get their attention and explained what just happened. They were definitely surprised, but were also very nice and understanding. They must have heard the panic and desperation in our voices because they took us seriously. They offered to drive us home, and we gratefully accepted. As they drove us back to my aunt's house, I remember being so glad they went outside when they did. For some background info, I'm female and was 17 at the time of this story. I used to work at a pizza place in my hometown. The job sucked in many ways, but the worst part about it was that my manager had no problem leaving girls alone to close. Granted, the town I grew up in was small and boring, and many people left their doors unlocked, but I still thought it was risky. On this particular night, I was closing the shop around 10. The last thing I had to do on the way to my car was take the garbage out, and the dumpster, as well as my car, were located on the side of the building. While I was making my way to the dumpster, I immediately noticed a man making his way towards me from across the shop's parking lot. He was wearing jeans and a black sweatshirt, and he had some sports cap on. Right off the bat, my heart dropped, and I got incredibly nervous. I threw the trash away and began speed walking to my car when this guy says something.
You got a cigarette?
My paranoia told me that the question was sketchy as hell, and I struggled to respond for a moment. I just said no and got in my car, and I shit you not, as soon as I closed my door, he booked it to my car and tried to open it. Obviously, I locked it immediately. I instantly started bawling and turned my car on. The man clubbed my window with his fists a few times, without a word, before booking it again into the nearby streets. I called my mom and then the police once I got home, and they opened a small investigation, but could never find the guy. There were no other cases of something like this happening somewhere else in town, and so I think he probably relocated somewhere else to avoid being caught. I really have no clue what that man wanted to do. Sorry if this was kind of lame or anticlimactic, but it was pretty damn scary to me. So, to the man who tried to get in my car, let's not meet again. Hey friends, I hope you're having a wonderful new year. Thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight. I'm sorry if I sound a little bit sick. I have some sniffles going on, but we're okay. If you like the video and you want to help support me, consider liking and subscribing. It helps me a lot. I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you very soon. Please take care of yourself and sweet dreams.